All right, 5 o'clock, we'll call this special meeting, Community Development Committee to order. I will ask the committee members, just state your name, and then we'll get starting over there.
Ryan Shirley, District 13.
Carrie Rice, District 5.
Jerry Van Zorman, District 18.
Scott Counter, District 11.
And Sean Anderson, District 2. You ready for us, Jason?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So we took and met on June 11th to start going over some proposed changes to Chapter 15 of the St. Croix County Code of Ordinances. This is the general zoning provisions of the county's ordinances which apply to all of the unincorporated areas of the county and the towns except for 4 towns, and those towns are the towns of Troy, Hudson, St. Joe, and Forest. So at that June 11th work session, the committee left off on section 15.322, which is campgrounds. And so from there, I will start and go down through the proposed text for campgrounds. So provision F, we were just trying to clarify that each campsite shall be plainly marked versus each parking stall, because that's what is really typically marked in a campground is the sites. And then the parking sites, and that would not be surfaced with gravel, asphalt, or other material free of site and mud. Shall be 2 off-street parkings for each campsite was struck, just because a lot of times there's more parking on that around the campground than just 2. The current ordinance requires 10 feet between campers, and right now that is excluding side outs. And it seems like as time goes on and more campers are having slide outs, and these slide outs originally were, maybe an 18-inch or a 2-foot slide out. Now they're pushing 3-foot slide outs, and that can substantially reduce the amount of spacing in that between the campers. So we were going to propose that it would be including the slide outs. A lot of that 10 feet, generally that goes back to the building code and the separation between like an accessory building and a principal dwelling, so that you don't have to have fire protection on those walls for the fire to jump. And please just jump in and that as you have questions or you have input.
Well, yeah, I guess my one question so far is with the side outs. What happens with campgrounds that were built with the old standard? Would they be grandfathered in?
Correct, and
Okay.
so they would be non-conforming, and so they're in that current layout. So, yep, they would not have to change for this. Provision M, every structure in a campground shall be developed and maintained in a safe manner. I'm not really sure what an approved and substantial manner was, so staff thought it would be just cleaner just to say that they must be developed and maintained safe. Provision N, the operator shall provide a solid waste management plan. Was just to try to take and simplify that, because a lot of the refuse, recycling is all the same. Oh, you got it.
Supervisor Counter has a.
Okay.
Just had a couple of things on the campground. One, I did read over the state statutes for the campground regulations, and they do also say the 10-foot. They also have other language in there regarding the campers have to have now a special identifier on the camper that they are fire safe, and there's a special, I forget what it was called on there, but if you look at the regulation, it identifies that for especially the long-term camping. Because they show both the ordinary camping, and then they have a subcategory on the new law now that also identifies people that are doing seasonal camping. And the seasonal camping has more regulations. There's more things involved, so we may want to, we don't necessarily have to respell everything, but we may want to refer people to those statutes so that they can get the exact verbiage as to what those requirements are. And delineate between the seasonal camping versus the standard type camping, and then versus the third one, of course, is the special event camping. The thing that, again, the concern is that now the state says the 10-foot also, but the issue is still is at 10 feet, are they putting the space that's necessary there for fire spread? Because again, on the building codes, it's 15 feet. And so I'm just, it seems like there's a conflict there. And the state statute clearly states 10 feet. So, but again, the question still lies there, is that, how do we feel about that, and do we even have the ability to change that or consider changing it if we wanted to for fire protection purposes?
Yes, I believe that you have the authority in a zoning ordinance like this and that to change that to a greater setback or spacing, because the ATCP code, Health Department code, is a minimum standard. If you're more than that, you're good. And we don't have the Health Department code as one of the statutory authorities for this. So if the committee, came to consensus or that they wanted to change it to 15, 20 feet, you could definitely do that. So.
Well, I guess that would be something I'd bring to the committee, for concerns. And for me, all these things, it's about safety. If you have one of those go up, you don't want to bounce from one to the next and wipe out a whole bunch of people in a campground. And once those go, they go fast. So,
My only concern is we're asking for 20 more, what we're asking for here is 20 extra feet between camping units, or 10 extra feet, but then you've got another 10 for someone else. You've got 20 feet between them.
no, I think it's between, isn't it between the
It's
sites?
between
Oh,
each
between,
camper.
between each camper or between
Yeah.
the sites?
It's between each camper.
Camper.
Okay.
So,
But
right
even
now,
so-
how the rules would be is if you had two sites and that you measure wall to wall on the campers and you'd only have 10 feet in between, and then they roll out their slide outs, and if you got a 2 or 3 foot slide out, you might only get down to a 4-foot path in between them. That's how the current rules are. So if we remove that to include the slide outs, now we've got 10 feet from slide out wall to slide out wall, but you can make that bigger if you want. That is a minimum standard, so.
Yeah, I'm thinking that even 10 feet, to me, 10 feet seems like an awful lot between campers. I don't know if I've ever camped in a campground where there's 10 feet between campers. Usually it's much less than that, because they want as many campers in a area as they can get. I think that's going to discourage campgrounds, and maybe that's what we're after.
No.
I would think of all the fires that didn't happen when there was no ruling. If you play the odds of a fire are pretty small.
I only know of one ever, and that is on Papagasset, and it burned 4 of them, but they were in there very tight, and they only had a 2-foot setback to their lot line, and so there's about 4 feet between the trailers, and they did go up very fast in that, so,
So we're limited by the state to require at least 10, right? I guess the discretion is do we have the discretion on including side outs or not?
And I believe that you've got the discretion on whether or not you you want to include slide outs or not.
Okay.
The health code is going to require the 10 feet between the units regardless, so that's why it's in the zoning code.
What are the committee's thoughts on the, well, one, the 10 feet rule and increasing it or not, and then two, whether or not to include slide outs?
I'm right with the 10 feet. I'm just trying to remember back when we built Blue River Campground. You know, it really depends on where you put your unit as you back it in there. You know, they're wide enough that, you know, if you park in the middle, you get plenty of room on each side. I'm just trying to visualize that as we think about other campgrounds around. You know, we don't want to be, I don't think, too restrictive, but I get your point on the fire spread as well. But I think, you know, as new campgrounds come in, that's kind of the standard around the area is what the state has there. And it's nice the way they have it. So I think that's kind of what everybody looks to, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm fine with the 10 feet. My related concern isn't fire, it has to do with exhaust. We a number of years ago lost a young woman in River Falls who was camping in a tent next to an air conditioning unit in a camper, and the CO2 went in the tent and she passed away. So, I mean, there's safety issues all the way around every camping environment.
And that's exactly, Chippewa Falls, over at the festival there, they had, and that was event camping, but they had several that, both close calls, but also deaths that happened from CO2 from running generators. A lot of campgrounds, and that's another thing we haven't even put into ours is hours of operation of generators. A lot of times, certain places will shut so that you can't use generators after a certain time of night and then before a certain time in the morning, just to try to prevent that from happening. The fire, you know, we can go with it, but you know, a lot of these guys with the canopy alone sticks out and at least another 10 feet on most of these new campers. So, you know, if you're even going from the slide outs, if you're not including canopies, you could have a canopy within a foot or so of the next camper at that. Most of the state campgrounds, they're way far apart. They aren't even close to 10 feet apart. You're talking like 50 to 150 feet apart. You know, so it's not even an equal comparison to what the ones that are typically, it's the private campgrounds where they pretty much shoehorn everybody in really super tight. But even like the New Richmond one, which is fairly close, they're still 30 feet apart. So, you know, just when you're talking 10 feet, you're talking basically from camper to camper 2 feet longer than one of these tables. So, give you an idea. But I still think it would be better to go with a little bit more, but you know, I'll go with whatever the majority of the board or the committee wants.
Okay, so kind of seems like 10 feet is the consensus, but including slide outs or excluding slide outs? Any thoughts on that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems generally the consensus is to include side outs, right?
Yeah, I would say it'd be between the farthest, the outer extremes, right?
Yeah, of the physical structure. Yep.
I think we got it then. We'll look into the fire certification for the travel trailers and see if there's a difference that we can include in the provisions here as far as seasonal camping. Supervisor Counter, did you want to include a provision in the camping about generator operation or as far as hours of operation?
I think it would be a good idea. I mean, it is, where you're gonna see that more so is gonna be in the private campgrounds. A lot of, most of the state campgrounds have all been upgrading and put electric to all their sites now. So that you don't really have that situation as much where they're doing, and they have the space between it. But as far as for the private campgrounds, it's, a lot of them have it and a lot of them don't. Some of them, especially their overflow camping areas, do not have electric. They're generally just sites. So, you know, if you wanted to distinguish between them, but if they have electric, they're not gonna, you know, then it would be irrelevant anyway. They're not gonna run their generators. But it's more so to protect for the ones that don't have electric provided to the sites.
But don't you think, we're talking about new campgrounds are gonna have electric, because everybody wants electric,
They don't.
unless they're the tenters.
Right,
And-
but all
and that's-
of these, all of the special event camping, if you go to Cedar Lake Speedway, they've got 1,200 sites with no electric.
But that's
And
event,
they're
yeah,
all-
right.
They're all shoehorned in, just like that, and that's where I'm concerned.
And I don't call that camping, I call that shoehorn. You take a chance when you do that.
Okay, so maybe that provision would go into a special event camping area in that provision, as far as generator usage? Okay. Okay,
It'd be the place for it, I think.
Or overflow camping and
Overflow,
special
yeah.
event, so that you're covering non-electric.
Yes, special event often is just the field.
Yeah, that's all it is.
so letter P there, we just caught a typo, and that it was an electric campground register, should be an electronic campground register. Before, we've had it for 5 years, that seemed a little bit excessive. And that, so 2 years, and that, just to have a couple years of use. Most of them are probably gonna keep it for 2 years, just because then they know how busy they're gonna be, and maybe they got, patrons that come back year after year.
Could I make a comment here?
Last one,
Yeah, we have a comment
Oops.
from,
Yeah,
Supervisor Rich.
Jason, if we could scroll back up to, I think it's now the new N. I believe in less is more, so I like that so much is deleted. But I don't know about, I'd like to know what the rest of you think. When I hear solid waste management, I don't think of just garbage. So, you know, or other refuse that might be on the ground. I mean, I think more of like Biffy toilets or whatever. So it does seem like maybe adding something on there, including garbage collection or something like that, just to make it clear. Am I the only one who their mind went there? Not, yeah, I was the only one.
I would think you could just say a waste management plan. Just- Does getting rid of the word solid make a difference?
That makes a difference.
We kind of have that in A, where we say adequate water supply and sanitary facilities. So really, it's in there already.
All right.
And again, getting back to when we're doing this, now, the statute requires, when you go into the state statutes, they're telling you how many toilets per population for the sites, but they do not tell you, you do not have to have showers. I could not find anything in the state statute that said that showers are a requirement on any type of campgrounds. So that was a question too, you know, most places do put them in, but there's no requirement of them from what I've seen in the state statutes unless somebody's finding it somewhere else.
I don't believe there is anything. The statute talks about the number of male, female, or unisex toilets and that per dependent and independent camping units. It also talks about how close the bathroom facilities have to be and that to the camping units.
Yep.
But I don't believe there's anything in there that says about running water, showers, that kind of stuff.
There is for the running water, they have to provide running water within 400 feet
Correct.
of the sites.
Yep.
And they have to have some form of a bathroom within 400 feet,
Yep.
whether it be pit toilets or flush. But the showers weren't in, that was one of the things. The other thing, there is a requirement, but they don't go, it's broke down differently. I'm trying to recall exactly. I read this just a few hours ago and I'm already forgetting it. But there's also a requirement for the pumping stations. And I think was it up to 300 for one pumping station? Every 300, I think, is what it was for the state statute.
And that, I know that it kicks in at 20. So if you have 20 sites, then you gotta have a dump station and that, but I'm not sure what that upper threshold is, just because we don't get too many campgrounds that are exceeding that, so, yep.
I was just looking like, and then it doesn't really indicate whether you have to have it for your event camping provisions either. You know, that was another question I guess I kind of had for this is it's stating it per 300, but for instance, like River's Edge, or not River's Edge, I'm sorry, the Speedway, when they're doing, and they'll have, you know, a 900 plus 9 to 1,200 campers in there, they would potentially need 4 of those pumping station or pump stations.
Correct. I believe the special event camping exempts them from a lot of that stuff underneath the health code, and that, but a zoning ordinance, and we as staff, I haven't had chance to go through and create provisions for special event camping, but if the county in that wanted to take and create a zoning regulation for special event camping and that to have X number of dump stations and that, you could, so, because it's not tied to the health code, so, yep.
Well, and here's the concern, just so that, you know, to update everybody on what's been going on, but I believe they have one station at Cedar Lake Speedway right now.
Correct, I believe there's one dump station.
They have one dump station, and so when they kind of have an exodus on Sunday, after being there all night, it becomes overwhelmed, and the people, a lot of the people do not go through the dump station. What they do, they'll pull out on County Road CC, and they'll pull the chutes for both their black water and their gray water and dump it right down the center line of County Road CC, going back towards the cities. And the people that live there have complained, and it goes on kind of where nothing happens about it. They can't have officers sitting out there waiting from the county sheriff's department, just policing, looking for that. But it becomes a real health issue, and you've got, I mean, it is terrible looking. You can imagine what's going on. I mean, it's bad. And it's not one or two. You're talking, there can be several of them that are pulling that trick, dumping as they're going down the road after they leave the speedway, and neighbors are very upset about it. So that's why I bring some of this stuff up, because I do have some concerns over that and how to remedy these issues. So.
But wouldn't that be under a different, that wouldn't be under this normal campground thing, but under the special event campgrounds, right?
And we'll try to address some of that
Yeah,
stuff. And that. But it's
for sure.
good conversation to have because it helps us as staff to be making notes and taking, and we'll bring back some proposed text that might address some of the concerns, so.
And currently, we have no special event ordinance,
Correct, and we do not.
so that's the problem.
But I can see the way around it. Right here, it says applicability, the section applies to public and private campgrounds that accommodate 2 or more camping units and where a fee is charged for use. So they'll charge an entrance fee and not charge a fee for camping, and then we're right back to nothing. Especially the racetrack up there, they're kind of that way.
Well, and that's,
They have been.
yeah.
Okay.
The other thing, I'm trying to remember in here, did we have a section on this for the mapping and the sign sizes for identifying sites?
So, just to get back to Supervisor Van Summeren's point, maybe we don't care if there's a fee being charged for use, so if we just struck in provision number 1 there, wherein a fee is charged for use, and we just put a period behind 2 or more camping units, maybe that would solve the issue.
I think that's a good idea. Thanks for catching that, Jason.
And as far, yep,
Down, one other question I just wanted to ask everybody was on H, with no more than 1 recreational vehicle allowed in any individual campsite. Is that something that we want to restrict on that, or do we want to allow individual campsites to restrict further from that? Because the way I read that is, if you can't have more than 1, then if you know somebody that's in the campsite 5 over and they drive their recreational vehicle over, now all of a sudden you're in violation.
Yeah, I can see your point on it. The issue is, though, if we're already down to 10 foot between units, and now you're gonna throw a bunch of recreational in there, and one of the biggest concerns, I should have brought my camera, I have pictures of some of these special events that take place there, but they already plug you can't even pass down the roads. And if they needed to get a fire truck or an ambulance, they can't. They aren't policing up, those access roads and stuff. And so if we're putting a bunch of recreational vehicles out on the street side along the edge, it pretty much would make it impassable for trying to get any emergency vehicles through there. But I agree with you that that's what's going to end up happening. But is there another thing you can do is a lot of the campgrounds do require that they have to have occasionally park outs where they have like a little lane area bumped out where they can do something like that. So if they're visiting around, they are, just a few steps away then instead of a long ways where they widen out the roads so you can still get the access road clear.
so this would be like a golf cart or a side-by-side, and that you could only have 1.
Right. Well, I think it's really important for us to, now that the more that we talk, to do the special event separate. And that I could see restricting more on some of these things, but I'm thinking about more of the long-term campsites and the bigger ones that may or may not build in the future.
I agree with this, and what I wrote down here for my scribbles in reading this was, what if someone wants to do like a Woodstock kind of an event? And I think the special event, we really need to think that through. People don't always think about safety with those kinds of things.
I think that's probably more where our directive should be also, because these, people the campgrounds I stay in, they have this done pretty well. Because they want something orderly, they don't want accidents, they don't want that kind of problem. KOAs or whatever, they're pretty good. But these event ones, that's just a kind of a free-for-all. Yeah.
So-
Where you shut it off is where you park. Yeah.
So I'm understanding that we would strike provision H in that there, and that so that we don't limit the amount of recreational vehicles on a campsite. Is that correct? Or do you want to limit to some degree?
Well, Jason, I have a question. So when you say mobile recreational vehicle, are you talking about a UTV, or are you talking about a camper? Are you talking about a motorhome? Because that could go either way.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, So we should probably be more specific, but be careful about saying you can only have one UTV per campsite, because I just, when I'm waiting to go any place in Baldwin on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, there are huge campers with trailers with at least 2 of these things on. So they're parking, they need two spots. I don't know if it's right for us to restrict that to 1, especially if it's a new campground and they're planning on that.
The more that I read that over again, I'm thinking that the intent of H was that a camper itself, we can't have more than 1 camper in each one, I think is what the intent was.
Okay.
I guess my thought is wording it as camping unit. I've seen a lot of campgrounds where you'll have, the older kids and the parents stay in the hard-sided trailer, and the young, yeah, or maybe the older parents and the young kids stay in the hard-sided trailer, and the teenagers are in a tent in the yard there. If you use camping unit, kind of. Yeah, there we go. That's good. Yep.
Okay, so we really don't designate a minimum campground size. We just limit the number of campers in that, or campsites per acre of 20, and then each campsite 6 campers for an individual family. Is there a desire for the group to create a minimum campsite size?
Have you ever laid that out to see how many, if you can get 20 individual campsites out of an acre? I'm a city kid, so I have no idea what an acre is. But that's not very big, I don't think. If you get 20 campsites and you've got to be 10 feet away from the next camper, can you even get 20 in an acre?
That campsite per acre matches the statute.
Isn't it 800 square feet, from what I remember, in there?
They go with sites per acre. Let me see if there's a size for each campsite. I'm not seeing one.
And that's in the health code, I believe, in that, but that is a lot, because, an acre is generally 208 feet by 208 feet, and so that gives you an idea to put 20 campers in that area. It's not a limiting factor, put it that way, so anyway.
So maybe before we go with that, somebody should lay that out and say, okay, so this is the size of a campground, 10 feet, that's how many you can get in there. Because otherwise they're gonna have to not comply to the 10-foot rule if they're gonna stick more in there.
Right.
But we should lay that out and leave room for, if you have a 20 acre or a 1 acre square, you can park around the outside, but you can't have roads inside.
I guess too, like that could apply to, like tents aren't as restrictive as far as spacing as far as trailers are.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about the size of the lot I'm on, and it'd be pretty easy to fit 4 campsites on my lawn.
The Boy Scouts could probably get 20 in an acre, but.
Oh, at least, yeah.
I guess to me, the 20 campsites per acre, you're saying no more than, so, I mean, in either case, if somebody wants to build a new campsite, they're gonna have to go through the department and get the layout approved and everything else, so, I mean, we're not saying that you have to have 20, we're saying that's,
Right, it's a maximum.
That might have been on the event camping for that 800, because that 42,560 square feet in an acre, and divide that by 800, that would be 53.2 campsites.
Correct, the 800 square feet, that is a special event health code camping. Yep, correct. Okay, the last provision there, it's provision R that's crossed out right now. The operator shall create an emergency management plan for their guest and post a map indicating where all the shelters, fire extinguishers, and relevant emergency contacts near the entrance of all publicly accessible structures. Just to kind of straighten up that. Very similar to like the county buildings here and that where there's a map where it shows where the tornado shelter is and stuff, so.
Jason, the one thing you had in there before was on, now this, if I recall on the statute, they do require you have to have an emergency phone located. And I know, most people have cell phones and they don't really have the need, but, I'm just going by what the statute had. And they said something about that, and I don't know if, I'm pretty certain I just read that today when I was going through. So that was the one thing I questioned about the change up on that. So it would have to, where that phone is located, generally they put it next to the office. And then it's like a direct connection that they can get to somebody for emergency services. But I'm not exactly sure, they didn't, that's as much detail as they put.
Statute basically says the operator shall display a durable sign posted in public view with the following wording: emergency communications. The sign shall provide directions to the nearest location where a phone is available for emergency use. So it doesn't say you have to provide one on site. Directions to the nearest location.
John, does it say what year that was updated? Again, well, because we're talking about the state.
This is the
Yeah.
current statute, so I'm not sure when that provision was adopted.
okay.
But
And you're not tied to that, but I mean, anytime that you can take and make your provisions or your rules similar, it's always a benefit for the public, so. So if I added the emergency phone in here as part of the emergency management plan, and would that be fine with the committee? I added this chunk right here.
Or just use the language they had, which you just have to identify where a phone is.
Last two sentences.
Okay, so you wanna keep those and get rid of what we added then?
So would you put directions to an emergency phone? I mean, the statute evidently doesn't say that. From what John read, I'd say not.
Okay, so I'll just remove this. And then I'll reject the deletion. Okay, that's back to where it was then, so. Yep. Yeah. So, we happy? Good, okay. And then, number 3D, just removed, refuse and refuse. It's basically the same. Seemed like an extra word, so, yeah. And then we're into 15.325. Is there any other questions on campgrounds?
The only thing was there, I'm just trying to remember, was there something identifying about the provisions for liquid waste management?
Yes. Yeah, campground shall have adequate water supply and sanitary facilities to accommodate occupancy, and then no wastewater from the trailers or vehicles shall be deposited on the surface of the ground, so.
Would that particular 2A at the end of that, would that be one where you might want to plug them over? So if there is basically this part of the ordinance is how to build campgrounds, would we want to identify just like the statute there that they could hit the button, and then they would be able to get the details about how many toilets and how many, you know, all of those because we don't want to repeat all that in here. But yet, if we can identify the statute where you can hit it and go to it, then the statute's always updated to what the current state statute is, so we're not becoming obsolete and having to rechange everything.
If you want to, it'd be SPS 382 and 383 that would probably apply there for the sanitary side. But really, they're gonna have to have a designer design those plans anyway, because it's gonna require state approval. So if you wanted to, you could list it, but in there, it'll talk about the design flow and the estimated wastewater flow for sites, and whether or not they got a dump station, or they don't have a dump station, whether they're tent sites. So it's up to you if you wanted to add the link or not, so. Go ahead and add the link.
I guess on 2A, I would just say at the end, per state statute. The only issue I worry about with links is, you know, if they change something on the state, then all of a sudden your link is broken.
Or if they don't update something at the state that we want, you know, that's the other thing. Depending on someone else is not always helpful.
John? Okay, we good on that? Okay. You ready to go into conservation design? Okay, so as with the rest of the ordinance, the purpose has been removed, and that just because we're going underneath the general purpose of the ordinance. When we did the amendments to Chapter 13, land divisions, there was, you know, trying to simplify the provisions to encourage conservation design within the county to kind of make that balance between, and that we know that we need housing units, and we know that the people that live here like to preserve the rural character of the county. And so conservation design allows those housing units to be clustered into a smaller area and then retain the greater area of the property, and that underneath some kind of an open space use. So basically, there's a lot of provisions in here, and we're just referring them back to a normal housing lot because we would treat them the same, and then also the provisions in Chapter 13. So as far as conditional uses, so in other words, in that we're not treating conservation designs differently than a normal buildable lot. It's gonna go back to that base zoning district as far as the allowable uses, as far as whether a minor home occupation is allowed or whether a bed and breakfast is allowed for conditional use. Same thing, common open space, the permitted uses are gonna take and be based on that zoning classification, which is conservancy, and the development's clubhouse or lodge. So this is pretty limiting as far as being conservancy, but again, the whole point is to conserve those open spaces. Are we okay with this? So basically, the conservancy district is gonna be the regulating zoning district in the open spaces, and then the lots are gonna be allowed for, based on the base zoning district for the lots. equestrians, we left that provision in there. Because that's kind of what a lot of these open spaces could be used for if there was a horse community and they wanted to have a shared barn and riding facility or riding arena. The density standards here, we updated the code citation there, but we left all of that the same. Didn't change anything. This table is in chapter 13 too, so those are the same.
Jason, excuse me, back one, when you say a nutrient management plan, are you talking only about they have to have feed, or are you talking about waste materials also?
Waste materials.
Waste materials. Why don't we put waste materials, why don't we write waste material in there instead of nutrient? I mean, it may be nutrient for flies, but we don't have to look out for them. You know, when I think about nutrient, and I think most people do, they think about something you put in your mouth.
I really think that's a good term, Jerry, so can we take an add to the back is required for the manure and that provided on the site or produced on the site?
Sure, yeah, I think, because I think that would be important for a conservation development, because otherwise you're gonna get some unhappy developers, or
So
unhappy
the
people.
590 is a standard and nutrient management plan, so all of our farm acres and that, they are doing nutrient management plans. It's about how much the land can handle of phosphorus or the nutrients from the manure, so, yep. That's why I would like to keep that wording in there, so. Contractor storage yard, this is a very common section that we deal with a lot. Generally speaking, in that, what we've seen from the Board of Adjustment is that they are supportive of these contractor storage yards. These are kind of like a home-based business, but it allows for some external storage on basically the business owner's land. And so we just tried to simplify provision A, and the minimum acreage size would be 3 acres in size. The issues that we've had with contractor storage yards is major housing developments and people wanting to operate, you know, a stockpile storage for their landscaping business within a housing development. And so the 3 acres is probably acceptable size, but that is arbitrary. It's up to you, so.
Jason, do you think it'd be good to put something in there about if that's a permanent storage yard that has fencing around it? And I say that because in the south of Baldwin area, there's a guy who's stockpiling chunks of concrete for the past year, and it's not very pretty, and it's in a very nice area, but it's, you know, if we're talking commercial buildings, they have to have an opaque fence, so nobody can see through it. But here, should we not think about adding that also?
So we kind of got that down here. I jumped ahead a little bit. Supervisor Van Sumeren, to number 4, screening. The applicant shall provide vegetative screening from any abutting lot in the R1, R2, or R3 zoning district. So,
Okay, I guess I was looking for it up in front, but that's fine, thank you.
and the one about the town, just so you know that we're not trying to take and avoid the town approval. So provision D here, we didn't think that really fell underneath the permitting section. So underneath the operational standards, that same provision is down here as a new provision D, and that, so that they still have to acquire the town approvals. And, you know, it talks about maintaining the property neat and orderly, and activities on the site, the storage, no manufacturing, retail services, or other businesses. And in the R1 and R2 district, hours of operation is 6 a.m., no later than 7 p.m. Really, we haven't had complaints on that. It's just these types of uses going into housing development is generally where we see the issues. We good on contractor storage yard? Okay. Yeah, and chickens and ducks. So we left the purpose there, and just kind of clearing up some typos in here as far as on lots less than 3 acres. So we just added the word 3, but the 3 was original, so that's what we've got currently.
I have a question, Jason, on C, number 3C.
Okay.
Having wings clipped. The PETA people don't like that, you know. They actually have written great lengths on the internet about what that does to the mind of a chicken and to some of the feathers, if they're the right kind of feathers, they have a blood vessel, a blood vein going in it, and then it'll leak blood. They really are adamant about that. Some veterinarians have joined that group also. Is that something we want to take out of there? I don't know of anybody who clips the wings of a chicken, but
So there is some unique provisions in here, I'll say. Generally, just the maximum number of chickens allowed is 12 per parcel. That seems to make sense, but regardless of how many dwelling units are on the parcel, you know, and that, I don't think that was needed, you know, in that, so we just tried to strike it. I mean, it's 12 per parcel, per lot. I think there's, maybe some support for only having, hens and not having roosters because they can wake people up in the morning, so maybe that can be, you know, provision D, having them being contained in that within the parcel at all times. Otherwise, if they're free range and your neighbor just, you know, spent $30,000 on landscaping, and now all of a sudden your birds are over there trying to find their supper, you know, and that it is new mulch, you know, that can be an issue. So, but yeah, to answer your question, I have no problem striking C if you'd like. So it's difficult for us to enforce, and that's when we're going through this. If we're suggesting some of these changes, it's like administratively, how are our staff going to take and be able to go out there? And are we going to, you know, are we going to send our staff out there to catch these chickens to see if they're wings?
see if the wind. I would say strike that one because I don't know how we would monitor it. I don't know. Yeah, and chickens aren't known for flying too far anyway.
Yeah, maybe if you see one flying over your car as you're approaching, then you would know, yeah.
Provision D, we just kind of simplified that one a little bit, just to make sure that any chicken coop, chicken pen must be located at least 10 feet from the property line and 25 feet from an adjacent dwelling or church or school or place of business. So not sure that it needs to be located in the rear or the side yard of it is basically. Are you okay with that change? So, I mean, if it's a 10-acre parcel, why can't it be in the side yard is what we were thinking, you know, so. Fences and walls. So,
I guess with the front, or like the option of people being able to put chickens in the front yard, is there are some township neighborhoods where the front yards are pretty prevalent. So maybe something like they must be located in a rear or side yard if the lot is smaller than 3 acres or something like that, or 2 acres, whatever.
We should okay this with Administrator Ken because he has chickens and I don't know where he keeps them.
I think he's got more than 3 acres, so I think he'll be covered, so.
And I'm betting he would have been in compliance with the original standard with which had it.
Where you just added that, Jason, about the 3 acres.
Yep.
On number 1, we say that you can only have ducks in 3 acres or more, so you're kind of repeating yourself.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, leave it in. I think we should leave it in then, since it only applies to under 3 acres in rear side yard.
Okay. Okay, we ready to move on to fences and walls? Okay, provision 2, just simple fences and walls may be located within the required setback area. The thought here is the property line fences that are allowed by Wisconsin statute, chapter 90. You have to be able to put your fence, on your property line, so it makes sense for that. But really, there's two kinds of fences in that. When I think of fences from a zoning ordinance perspective, you got an open fence and you've got a closed fence or a privacy fence. And one in that, your open fence is sometimes a split rail fence, but generally like a property line fence, barbed wire, woven wire on the bottom, that kind of stuff, versus picket fence, privacy, alternating sides or solid panel. And so privacy fences, we tried to simplify this a little bit. At least 50% opaque or solid, and at least 4 feet in height shall not exceed 6 feet in height. So in other words, in that we would classify a privacy fence, and that has to be more than 4 feet tall, and can be no more than 6 feet tall, and it has to be 50% tall. Open fences shall not exceed 8 feet in height. The idea behind that is like a game fence or a deer fence, and that maybe there's chickens or something, and that would have a higher fence. Privacy fences must meet road setbacks, but open fences can go up to the highway right of way. So that's kind of like your barn pasture fence, and that the farmer generally pastures up to the back slope of the ditch or in that on a town road or whatever the right of way is. And then, of course, no privacy fences would be allowed within the vision triangle of the road.
Jason, is that 8-foot height, is that high enough for, it just seems like elk or something like that someone I know used to have, doesn't have anymore. I thought he said he had to have a 12-foot fence for an elk.
If you want to make that taller, and that we're just trying to suggest, and that an idea, because 2.5 feet when located in the vision triangle below, it just seemed like it was pretty. Why do we want to have anything that could block people's view within the vision triangle? So those are the 4 feet, the 6 feet, the 8 feet. Those are all just arbitrary numbers. So
I wonder if you want to, again, if it's for some wild game, you want to adjust that up. I think that's kind of low. 8 feet would be a foot under this ceiling. Yeah, why don't you go to 12?
Make it Supervisor Van Summeren?
I'd say
12.
go to 12 foot on that one.
Okay.
Because I think that's what he did anyway. So
I'd like to go to 8 feet on the privacy fence too, because some properties are higher than others, and if you have a 6 feet fence, you could stand on the high point and just look over someone's privacy fence pretty easily.
What we voted from was just 8 feet in D here, but there's no statute requirement, so you're able to make that what it is. I think it's important just to have caps on those, because I have seen 35-foot tall privacy fences between two neighbors, and let's just say it was not sightly. So. Mm-hmm. And it was on a lake lot, so. And so the chain link fence and that basically open fence would be a chain link fence, so that's where that provision is still covered, so. And any fencing in the shoreland areas or the St. Croix, that's completely different. That's gonna be covered underneath those two ordinances, so.
Jason, the one thing that we talked about earlier too was when you have the fence along the road right away, that wherever there would be a access coming in off from the road, that there would be a setback where the gate wouldn't be able to be placed on the right of way. The gate would have to be placed so that there would be adequate parking, so somebody is pulling off the road before they open up the gate for safety reasons.
It seems to me, based on our conversation, that a lot of these conversations about fences and walls really had to do more with residential than rural. We start to get into rural needs. You know, most people don't need a 25-foot tall fence in a residential setting. So I don't know if there's a way to capture that, or if the intent here is only to put some structure around fences and walls and mention the zoning areas. I mean, I don't know what you guys think.
Could do that by zoning district, if you'd like. That'd be a way to do it.
Well, being a farmer doesn't have to get a permit to build a fence. I'm guessing he's gonna build it to fit whatever animal he puts inside. And again, are we gonna police that? Are we gonna tell him, no, that you can't have a 6.5-foot fence, you have to have a 4-foot? You know, are we, do we have this in there because it's necessary? Is it necessary only, as Carrie says, for residential areas?
And then, where we're gonna see the complaints probably are the privacy fences, and that probably not on the open fence side of it, so. So if you'd like to strike the open fences, we can. We were just trying to put it in there because we had some provisions about chapter 90 here, which is all open fences, and then the chain link fences, so that's all. So it's up to you. You probably have it covered with 12 feet though. I mean, that's pretty tall, so. And I think with the fences along highways, when a fence is located along a road right away, adequate parking shall be provided between the fence and gate, or fence/gate and roadway to prevent a vehicle or object from protruding into the roadway while the operator is opening the fence. So it's just a good design, you know, standard. So, yep, very good. Thank you, Supervisor Counter, for reminding me. And home occupations, this is something in that is getting more and more common as commercial space is more and more expensive to rent. And we're seeing a lot of people being able to work from home. So most of this, though, we didn't have many changes. And provision D, we just added off-street parking because then it links to our ordinance requirements for off-street parking. So they're not parking on the street.
I just had one observation under here, underneath general standards, and I think it's C. I'd like to know what everybody else here thinks. But for me, telling people that they can't do this business and see the public earlier than 8 a.m. or later than 10, 8 a.m. seems kind of late to me. I mean, we're in the Midwest, a lot of businesses conducted at 7. So my suggestion is to move it to 7 a.m. I mean, we've got school buses going in my neighborhood at 7. Everybody's up. So does anyone have any objection to that?
No.
Okay.
Okay, we got her. Okay, so under minor home occupations, we thought that provision B was redundant because all of these uses, and that if they meet all the criteria, they're either in the use table or we don't really care what the use should be because they're already meeting the minor home occupation stuff. And so, and also some of these uses seem like they're maybe a little bit outdated and not that common to what we would see nowadays. So I think it's really covered in other sections of the ordinance. Any problems with striking those provisions? Okay.
Jason, I have a question on number 4 of H.
Okay.
No goods purchased for resale are offered for sale at a garage sale? Page 51. Go up to the top, yep.
Oh, garage sale.
Yeah. So now if you look at number 4, once again, I think that happens often. I know of people who go to garage sales and buy stuff at other people's garage sales and have a garage sale of their own. I think that could be struck out of there. To me, that makes no sense. The same with number 5. I think that's going to be really difficult to police, and I really don't think it's necessary.
I kind of want to keep number 5 because you could have somebody. Oh, never mind. Held no more than twice yearly.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, major home occupation. This is something that we run into a little bit more than the minor home occupations. Minors, we don't get complaints on. Majors, we are getting a few complaints on. And one of the things that is a limiting factor right now is that a major home occupation must be conducted within a permitted accessory structure, alone or in combination with the principal dwelling, if the total floor area dedicated to the home occupation, including any area used in the principal dwelling, is limited to, currently it's 1,500 square feet. And staff talked about this quite a bit, and we think that that is substantially pretty low, and potentially maybe 6,500 square feet might be more reasonable. That would be basically like a 60 by 120 building. The issues that we're seeing is people want to take and be able to, we had one go to the BOA, in fact, they were running a pool business, and so they wanted to be able to have an office within the building. They wanted to be able to store like their pool liners and stuff that they were taking out to the job sites, and then they had several vans, you know, and that they were taking, or pickups, and they were storing it all within the building. And they actually had some photos of the building and stuff, and I mean, it looked very nice and clean, you know, and that it wasn't like this stuff was being parked outside. And so, I don't know what your thoughts are as a committee on that, but.
Yeah, I'd be agreeable to the 65 for home occupation, but again, the only caveat to that would be what zoning district it's in. If you had an R2 or an R3, you might have to look at a rezoning versus a home occupation.
Yep, and so a major home occupation does require a CUP as well. What comes into effect a lot of the time is that no more than 2 people other than the residents of the dwelling may be employed or engaged in the major home occupation. So it's only yourself and 2 outside employees that can be working there. So it really comes into more of the storage aspect of it, you know, so, or equipment, you know, maybe you got several pieces of equipment.
So what would be an example of a major home occupation?
Kind of like the one I just said with the pools, and that was one that we had recently.
Okay, the pools.
Maybe it is a roofer, and maybe they've got inventory of shingles or, you know, felt for their roofing business, and maybe some drip edge and stuff, and then they've got a building, and maybe they've got a scissors lift that they put in one stall of their garage. Maybe they've got an office, and so I think the 1,500 square feet, a lot of times that's almost eaten up just in the office alone, you know. And the contractor storage yard, you know, that's more of outside storage, you know, and that versus this is looking more at inside, so.
But wouldn't we rather have inside storage rather than outside storage? I mean, and that's why this 500 square foot thing looks kind of small. On B, 1B, top of page 52.
6,500 now?
Oh, okay, that's,
1B?
that one right there, that's 500 square foot.
Yeah, it was 1,500 square feet. And
Okay.
that right now, that's what it is, and we're proposing to go to 6,500 square feet.
Oh, okay,
So,
but the dash is through the 6 here too. Well, it looks like it.
It's just so close that it looks like it's.
Okay,
it's
I
not.
thought you'd scratch off 16 feet, which I thought was pretty ridiculous. And, excuse me,
so basically it'd be
Yeah.
almost 60 by 110
Yep.
building now, you know, so, you know. Right, and that's
So
one
the-
of the things, and that there's a few other sections in the ordinance, where it seems like in the past, we've really been critical on regulating what is going on inside the buildings. And typically, that's kind of unique for zoning ordinances. Typically, we're concerned about the appearance and stuff outside, the sanitary, the runoff, you know, and that, the stormwater, you know, so, because we do have that in other places, about the amount of square footage, so you'll see that several times.
Supervisor Shirley.
Can we
has
go
a-
back to number 3 that you got highlighted there? It seems a little restrictive. I could imagine that the example of the pool company has more than 2 persons other than the resident that's employed and engaged in the home occupation. That seems a little restrictive.
It's up to you. Yeah, I mean, it's arbitrary in that, so, yep.
I don't know where we put a number on that, or if you just want to strike it entirely.
I'd be for striking that entirely.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
I mean, why do we limit the number of,
Why do we care?
of workers, yeah?
Can do that. Yep. And number 2 there, not to skip over that, but I think the main point there is that the major home occupation must be located at least 100 feet away from an existing neighboring residence. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, if it's gonna be one of these bigger buildings and that little bit of extra setback, and generally they're gonna have that kind of land anyway. Yeah, so this is, as far as the home occupation, provision 3 here, new 3, is very important because that really deciphers or splits up what is use that's going to require a commercial zoning classification versus a home occupation. And so if they're a service orientated, and that taking a raw product, let's say a cabinet maker, or they're creating the finished products, like a tax accountant or a taxidermist even, but only 20% of the merchandise items and that not produced on the site may be displayed or sold within the dwelling or structure to be used. So think about it, if you're running a hair salon out of your garage or your house, and that generally you're providing the service, the haircuts and the perms or whatever, and that, but maybe you've got some specialty hair products there, you know, on a shelf, and that, so there is some sales in that, but it's not like you're opening up a bait shop or a bait store and doing the whole thing as retail service. So 20% is a number. We talked about it as staff. We threw around some numbers. That is an arbitrary number, so. Any thoughts on 20%?
That seems small, doesn't it? Why limit that also to 20? Why not say 50%? Why?
Okay, yeah, and that, it's just trying to throw it out there, and we're just trying to create the line of when we need to rezone versus when they can do it as home-based business, so.
Yeah, I would have no problem with increasing that. I think 20% is rather small. You mentioned hair salon. I know when my wife goes, she comes back with 20% of that, I'm sure, in Baldwin, in her arm. So I think we should increase that so she can bring more stuff over.
Should we say 45?
45. That's a good number.
All right, 45.
45. Okay. Provision.
I'm wondering-
there, that's because our ag zoning classifications are certified for farmland preservation, so we can't change that one.
To go back to that, sorry, number 4 again. I think where I'm hung up is the displayed, because it says displayed or sold, so I think we're trying to get that definition where you have a commercial building and you're displaying product to sell versus selling product maybe out of a home-based business. So I think maybe it's the display word that we need to regulate.
Just
I mean, I don't know how we would necessarily regulate and police that, but I think that's, because again, if you go back to like a contractor or an excavator or something like that, you know, if they're bringing products in, more than 20% of what they're bringing in per product is probably being sold.
So what about that? Only 45% of sales shall be merchandise items not produced on-site or sold within the dwelling or structure used for the major home occupation. So that would be how we would enforce it. So if we'd be able to go out there and say, okay, show us your breakdown, you know, and that, what did you take and do for your service and that, for your haircuts and that, what did you do for your product if we got that far? And it'd be a very easy way to administer it if we wanted.
I'm kind of seeing where you're coming from with that, because the deal is, what if you have the heating contractor and you know, he's inventorying furnaces out of his location, and then he has customers that come in and he points, well, I got this kind, I got this kind, I got this kind. And, but his entire mainstay is all, he might be using 50% of his shop space just to inventory, because they're big pieces. And so in instances like that he's kind of relying on that inventory so that he can do quick sale and do the installations and be able to show a customer if necessary. But again, they aren't bringing in 50 people a day or something. You're going to maybe have 3 a week or something in terms more like that, if even they visit. A lot of them, they just trust the contractor and he puts it in.
I mean, I think the intent to this is they're just not selling them out of their house as like a Home Depot type of business, right? So, or whatever, name a big box store or any kind of store, really doesn't matter. I get where you're coming from. I guess my thought there is that would typically be the type of thing that is just kind of sold at the place of the work is being done. It's not like directly being sold out of the house.
Right.
Especially if like a roofer, they're just going to say, here are your colors, pick one.
Right.
Is there a reason for having number 4 in there at all? I look at that and I think, what are we trying to say there? Why must a home occupation involve raw products at all? Why can't a home occupation be, as we've been talking, a resale for plumbing supplies or anything? and why limit that to 45% of the merchandise? Why not just take number 4 out of there? What purpose does it serve, I guess, is my question.
Because if we took out the 2 people and that, as far as employees, now if you want, you can run a 6,500, if we were to take out number 3 or 4 there, and that you could run a 6,500 square foot building store, if you will, out of a residentially zoned property, as long as you stayed underneath the 6,500 square feet. So in other words, let's say a guy, gal, whatever, maybe has hair products, goes and buys a whole bunch of hair products, gets a bunch of seconds, and they've got a big shed and that there, it can be completely full of hair products, and they can take and be open from 7 to 10 p.m. at night, and they can operate out of that location and do the retail sales. So the idea in that with the home occupation is that you're providing a service of your own skill, you know, or that you're taking and creating a product at your home, you know, like I said, taxidermist for an example. You're taking a raw product, creating a finished product, and then selling it. But yet, a lot of times, home occupations don't allow any, you know, resale of any product. So we were trying to provide some flexibility in that to allow for a hair salon to be able to sell some gel or whatever in that for hair products. So that's what we were trying to figure out, some kind of freedom. That's why we started at the 20%, because currently we didn't have any ability to do that. So
I think the line that we're trying to make is not have, I don't know necessarily retail's the word, because it's the amount, it's the amount of people that you have the public into the area is what we're talking about. That's our definition between commercial and home occupation, because we put a percentage on merchandise, then that restricts the HVAC contractor or whoever it is that, you know, in construction, as materials have gone up, you know, it used to be 40% material, 60% labor, and now it's closer to 50-50. You know, we're over the 45 probably for most things. So where do we do that, and how do we put it on there that's actually policeable?
I think I like where he's going with that sentence there.
I think of the veterinarian who runs his business out of his home. None of the merchandise does he make on site, but he might have it displayed for the farmer who wants to treat his own animals, or dogs, or whatever it might be. And so where would he fit in there? He doesn't need a business, he just needs a telephone and a garage to store it in, or whatever. And this kind of limits him to, he can't do that, but his neighbor who cuts hair can. That's what I just wonder if that's even, that's why I question its validity, its need.
I think if we get rid of the 45%, then you need to bring back some type of limit on the number of people. Because,
Oh, I see, okay, the number of employees.
yeah,
Maybe daily customer counts or something.
daily visitors.
Yeah, right, but employees you could police, purchasers would be more difficult.
So I just added that last sentence, because I think it was trying to get at what you guys were talking about with a contractor. A product bought and installed off-site by the business is not limited by this provision.
Okay, great. But I guess I still say, do we even need something that says that?
I'm thinking of a different example. Let's say you've got someone who creates, is a furniture maker or a furniture refinisher where they need some space and storage, and maybe they sell it in certain markets, fairs and such, but they also have a business card and somebody says, hey, do you have some more things, or could you do something custom, so the person is coming to their house. I think we want to support and accommodate that kind of effort.
And that would be done with this, because 45%,
Okay.
so they would be building that. Let's say you're selling bluebird houses, you know, and that you're building the bluebird houses, you're taking them to arts and crafts fairs, and all of a sudden somebody wants a wood duck house, and that you're like, yeah, I got the skills and I got a plan, and that I can build a wood duck house. That would be something that they would be taking that raw material, the 2x4, the 2x6, whatever it might be, to build that bluebird house, and they're creating the bluebird house out of it. So that would be covered underneath this. But now, if you had that same bluebird house builder, and all of a sudden he got a good deal on buying 2x4s, and that now what we're saying is, with the 45%, is 45% of your income or your sales can be from selling 2x4s, and that to Sam down the road, but the other 55% has to be from making bluebird houses.
Unless he's literally taking them and installing them for Sam down the road, which makes sense.
I'm not saying it's right, Supervisor Van Summeren. That's what we're trying to.
It's a tricky spot to be in, because we have to make that definition somewhere. But as you see more and more of the craze of the barn dominium style, where people are trying to run a business out of their house and do it that way, how are we going to how are we going to regulate it, and how are we going to differentiate that? I'm not exactly sure what that answer is.
Well, we can always come back to it, you know, and that we've got some ideas. I think we did add that last sentence there to try to deal with the contractor side of it, you know, whether or not it's, you know, a shingler or whether it's an HVAC person. So anyway. Okay. And this is just a diagram showing the 100 feet. And then inspections, there may be one annual inspection each year of any authorized home occupation by the land use administrator, his designee. And then also that we can access the property just to verify compliance. Okay, housing. So dwelling unit area, so every dwelling unit shall provide the following minimum floor area for each family residing in the building. And so, single-family detached units were 720 square feet on the main floor, two-family and multifamily were 500 square feet. And so we're like, well, if we allow it for two-family, a duplex, or, you know, a three or fourplex, and that, do we want to take and offer it as a single-family across the board for 500 square feet? This goes back to kind of the affordable housing thing. I don't think that we probably had any 500 square foot houses built in St. Croix County in the last 10 years, but, you know, and that, so is that table really, you know, needed, you know, because most of them are going to be over that 722 probably, if they're a single family.
I was just looking today at some duplexes and single-family that are one-bedroom homes that were 520 square feet. And they were, the way the layout was, they looked pretty spacious, actually. I think it was 16 by 35 for the size of the unit.
And I mean, this is still, you know, basically 20 by 25, you know, so it's still not to the point of a tiny home, you know. But, you know, I think building price per square footage is probably between $300 to $350 per finished square foot nowadays, depending on your trims. And so that's still a $150,000 place, you know, so, yep. We okay with leaving that just kind of a little bit simpler at 500 square feet? If the towns are bigger or require a larger house and that, of course, that would be more, and that what they would have to follow because it'd be more restrictive, so.
A lot of times the covenants require bigger ones. If they have special neighborhoods and stuff, it's gonna be written up in the covenants. So I think us being minimal and looking at it from that standpoint, it opens it up so that there's a lot more options for different kinds of development and things to be done, especially when we're looking at a time when affordable housing is like non-existent.
Okay. Multifamily dwellings, we left that alone. Manufactured homes, on the installation and that, the bottom of the manufactured home shall be skirted. We thought that that was something that was missed. Foundation requirements, manufactured homes have to take and comply with the Uniform Dwelling Code a lot of the times, so as far as their foundation. So, but that doesn't require a slab, you know, so again, affordable housing and that, do we really want to require the slab?
I'm not as worried about the slab for, say, you know, if we're gonna do a skirting type, but where I am very concerned about is a way for anchoring, that there should be something, or, you know, if we're not going to, because that's part of what a concrete foundation does. It gives it a point of anchorage so that you can hold it down. And believe me, we've had plenty enough 60-mile-an-hour winds go through that if it were an unanchored building with a crosswind, it probably would not be there very long.
So you're thinking like at least footers that you're permanently attached to?
Just something that, yeah, so that there's some type of anchorage for wind anchorage. There's different ways of doing it. They have screw-in deals that work too, and there's different methods, but it should be something that's engineered that's going to be able to prevent a rollover in a 60-mile-an-hour wind.
I think most municipal areas, I know Baldwin does, I know Hammond does, I think Woodville does, require that all new manufactured homes that are put down have a cement slab, because that keeps them, you level it basically on that slab, and otherwise they are very crooked and the sewage runs the wrong way, and so I think that's the reason they've gone to them, and maybe we want to stick with that too. I don't know why we would take that one out. That's my question.
Yeah, just cost, you know, and that, and the size, you know, so. Mhm. And it's kind of a building code thing, but I mean, and that, so if you'd like to keep that in there, we could definitely can, so.
I think the anchoring is more important personally, but
And anchoring would just be, I think that might be another reason that they want that, but yeah, I think so. I'd like to see it left in and maybe mention anchoring there also.
Okay, I did right up here in that, so. Bottom manufactured homes shall be skirted and shall be anchored sufficiently for high winds.
And then you could add and put on a masonry foundation.
Yep.
Right, in that same,
I deleted that deletion, and so we're back to what we've got there for the
okay,
foundation.
okay.
So, yep. Generally, most manufactured homes, I believe they leave the wheels and axles and that, maybe not the wheels, but at least the axles underneath them. And so they usually don't pull them out because then you have no mobile home, you know, and that. So anyway, so we struck that. So, but the hitch transporting lights would be removed. Caretaker units, this whole section we've never used, it sounds like. So we're not really sure what the intent was really even for this, but it has to do with a self-storage facility, mini storage.
I kind of agree with, on that one, possibly removing. I know what this has done, it created kind of a loophole where people were building storage facilities and then they were building homes within them and calling it a caretaker unit. And so they were kind of skirting some of the other zoning ordinances and getting into areas. I mean, we even have that at New Richmond at the airport hangars. People have been living in some of the hangars, which actually it's against FAA regulations too, but they just claim that they're there for, they have an overnight stay and they have a place to stay overnight.
Yep, so just kind of a provision that is kind of unneeded.
before we move on, one other thing, I know we've talked in length in the past about accessory dwelling units, but you talked for a second on tiny homes. And we don't have any provision anywhere for those, and I don't know, whether we get questions on it or not. Like, we're not allowed in the county from the way I read it right now.
I don't know how many questions we got on it. I know that our staff started tracking ADUs to see how many inquiries we had. I just started looking at, or I looked at it like last week. We started when we had the conversations back in probably March about ADUs, and there's been like 3 to 4. And I'm not saying that every time that we get a call on it, we're good about documenting it, but there is some interest in it. And I would assume that that amount of interest level would probably be the same for tiny homes because they're looking at it as an affordable option, you know. So right now, and that dwelling unit area, and that would take and limit any tiny homes. So that's basically prohibiting tiny homes. But if the committee wanted to, we could look around and see what kind of provisions they have for tiny homes. And instead of caretaker units here, maybe we have a tiny home section, you know, and that, because they're gonna be totally different. I think the biggest issue with a lot of those tiny homes is they run into uniform dwelling code requirement standards where they're having a hard time meeting the foundation and the footings and stuff like that, so. That's my opinion on why they haven't taken off here in Wisconsin a lot, unless they're in like a campground or something.
Yeah, I don't know if they're called tiny homes, but I know that some cities are allowing for small homes for aging parents, basically in like a back lot or something. That's the same concept.
Accessory dwelling.
Accessory dwelling, yeah.
Supervisor Rice, I can kind of fill you in a little bit. So the committee started looking at accessory dwelling units last fall, and I went to the Wisconsin Towns Association meeting and that for St. Croix County in October of last year. And there was probably close to the 20 towns in that present there in some form, and there was very strong opposition to that because of VRBO rentals on them, and with the sewage, you know, and there's 911 and kind of all that what if might happen to them. And I don't think any of the towns were opposed for the actual purpose, and that if it was for an aging parent or maybe a child that had special needs for care, and that I think the towns were probably all supportive for that. It's just after that use or that need is no longer present, what is that going to turn into? And that was their concern. So.
Okay. Yeah, that makes, I just wouldn't want the county to be restrictive if it comes to that, but maybe if we're silent on it. Is that the case?
Correct, yeah. We're silent on it, but they'd have to take and subdivide it out, you know, and build another 500 square foot dwelling, and that currently is what they would have to do. Okay, salvage operations. No portion of any salvage operation may be located in the street yard, meaning between the primary structure and the street. A lot of times salvage operations don't have a primary structure, it seems like. They maybe have a scale house or something on the entrance. And so, but if they're in the middle of a 40-acre parcel and that, they do have to have a conditional use permit, you know, and they're only permitted in the R1, C1, I1, I2 districts. Do we care if it's within that front area? And is it really even gonna apply, because the first thing is mainly going across the scale, you know, so, and that, I think it's probably the same thing with saying street yard, because the scale is gonna be the first thing, they're not gonna let you drive through the whole salvage yard and then hit the scale, you know, so. I don't think that really changes it, it just hopefully makes it a little bit cleaner. And salvage materials shall be enclosed by an opaque fence or berm and or year-round vegetative screening so that materials are not visible from other property in the vicinity of the salvage operation, nor from a public road, nor from a navigable water. And then the provision that we are suggesting maybe striking is the fence or vegetative screen shall not exceed 12 feet in height and shall be properly maintained to satisfy the screening objective. And so the idea is there, do we really care in that if they stack materials more than 12 feet high? And that if the first part of that paragraph or sentence, if it is truly vegetative screening so that they're not visible from other property in the vicinity of the salvage operation. So if you've got 40, 50 foot, you know, Norway spruce trees and it's completely blocked, you know, and that, do we care how tall it is? And it could be an administrative nightmare just to go out there constantly and try to measure a salvage pile, you know, and that for 12 feet high. Salvage material shall not be located within and that 500 feet of any residence other than that owned by the owner of the premise, or 1,000 feet from a lake or a stream. So the idea behind the 500 feet, striking that and making it 300, is that if you've got a 40-acre parcel and you're 500 feet from there, and that you would have essentially 1,000 feet of that 40 used, so you'd only have a 320-foot square in the middle, so you'd only have about an acre and a half and that of space out of a whole 40 using that 500-foot setback provision. So 300 feet is still pretty restrictive, you know, it almost means that a salvage operation probably needs an 80, you know, in order to take and have some space. But anyway, we're thinking, you know, water contamination and stuff like that too here, so. And of course, E is common sense. So for fire protection, an unobscured fire break shall be maintained 15 feet in width and height. And so we change that for public safety and emergency management plan and spill response plan shall be in place to address fire protection, chemical and oil spills and other contaminants that may be present on site. Not sure that 15 feet is adequate, you know, but to take and make sure that they're able to get around and that they're able to access the site is probably more important just in general. For like a grass fire, you know, if they can jump 15 feet pretty quick.
Jason, is it time to add something about batteries from electric vehicles now? You know, there's a big issue about that. Lithium-ion batteries will ignite for no reason at all. And at the last year's Wisconsin Counties Association, I spoke with a towing company operator, actually owner, and he said that's a big issue. He was from the Madison area, and so there were a lot more electric cars there. And he says when he pulls one into his lot, his insurance company has made him put concrete bunkers between the cars that he tows in, because he was having trouble. Other salvage yards are having trouble with in the middle of the night when no one's around, that battery would burst into flames. Terribly hard to put out. And it would burn a row of other people's cars who were, you know, waiting to be repaired. Is it time for us to add some wording that in a salvage operation such as this, the flammable batteries, for instance, there has to be a concrete divider between them. And he said how many he had seen burn, and it was quite a number. I was surprised.
Something like that. All lithium batteries shall be isolated and contained to prevent damage to other vehicles and structures if a fire starts.
I would say something like that. You might want to just, you know, check that and round that off or whatever. I think that would be very important, because talking to the fire department person, he says that in so many cases you have to let them burn down. You can't put them out. So, and they're going to become more and more prevalent in our lives, like it or not.
Provision G, in that we added salvage vehicles just because we don't want a salvage yard operator or anybody that drives a vehicle in there, unless it's a salvage vehicle, we don't want them to drain the fluids. We want them to be able to have the fluids in there, so it's just a clarification. I think is a good thing to have. Does anybody want to take a break in that for 5 minutes, or?
Yeah, we can do that.
as far as what is considered junk. So it's got lots of different stuff. Building components or construction materials not installed or in use, including but not limited to doors, windows, siding, shingles, lumber, and flooring. Our staff thought that lumber was something that you would commonly see in that outside. And it's generally not, unsightly if it's stacked and stuff. What about lumber for a new home site? If somebody gets some lumber delivered, obviously it's probably not junk, or if they're building something, we might have lumber laying around. So that was one of the only things that was kind of a staff concern to enforce administratively.
Jason, how about under A, under motorized vehicles, and I hate to say this, but how about like tractors? Because, there's a lot of tractors setting out in places that should not be either. That's not in there. Pretty much everything else is. Cars, vans, trucks, bicycles are missing too, but mini bikes and scooters are in there.
Supervisor Van Summeren.
Pardon?
That is a policy choice, Supervisor Van Summeren.
It is, okay.
So it could be a policy change.
Yeah.
And that, I'll tell you in the past that a lot of the agricultural equipment has been exempted.
Okay.
And so it can definitely be regulated if you'd like to regulate it. So
Well, if it is true junk, it's junk, no matter what it is. But if it's not, if it's just a piece of equipment sitting in the field because that's where you quit using it and next year you'll pick it up, then it's not junk. So again, I don't know where you want to draw the line. That just stuck out that, okay, so that's not there.
Yeah,
Maybe it should be.
I get where you're coming from though, because the line says like, if not currently capable of motorized operation.
Right.
So like if you just have a rusty tractor in the field, like should that be part of this?
No, two of my neighbors have tractors that don't run, that have gardens planted around them and have them all painted up, and they look like brand new 1920s John Deere tractor, and it's part of their landscape. So, well,
Yard art. And not to be differentiated from, yes.
how about agricultural equipment? Because what about a combine or something like that that might be in a field or?
Unless it's John Deere.
That one would still be in operation.
Jason, you're exactly right. It would still be operational. Thank you.
Okay.
To go back to I with building components, I wonder, do we put something in there like not suitable for installation, or, I mean, you're basically looking for scraps and pieces that are piled up that are not, nobody's gonna put into a new house or a remodel or whatever.
So if I struck installed in that and put in not suitable for installation, would that be better? Because that's exactly what we were trying to avoid in that. And then I could keep lumber because we were trying to take and avoid, because right now the way it reads is if you got a new house site and you get all your materials delivered and they're not installed, technically it'd be in violation even though they're all brand new materials.
Yeah, you could have your pallet of windows show up and it's in violation.
Wouldn't you say suitable for use instead of suitable for installation?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Shorter.
Yeah, suitable for use or in use. Yep, okay. Scrap metal, plastic, or glass not in use, or wood, so like firewood, and that was what we were thinking here, and that, I mean, you don't use it until you burn it, is it really a concern? I think that's what they were trying to get at, was like firewood. You could, I mean, if we left it in there, one could argue that you couldn't stack a rank of firewood out by your fire pit, because it's not in use, so. Okay, standards, the accumulation of junk outdoors is prohibited in any zoning district. Exceptions, the accumulation of certain junk items is permitted in the rear yard if it meets the following requirements. So number 2 and number 3 talk about the junk exceeding 8 feet in height and located in the rear yard. So if we take out those provisions, number 2 is screened from ordinary public view or from a neighboring property by means of opaque fencing and or year-round vegetative screening or other appropriate means. So we got year-round screening. What we're saying there is, do we care if it's screened, and that from the road and from the neighboring property owners, how high the junk is or where the junk is located on the property? If nobody can see it, out of sight, out of mind kind of theory.
Get back to one of my neighbors that made the decision that got into a battle with his neighbor and decided to pile a huge mountain of scrap materials and junk about 15 feet from his neighbor's property line. And the pile was started at about 6 feet high. And the neighbor was a retired gentleman and he was upset because the guy with the junk kept pulling out his survey markers, the buried 2 foot deep steel markers. And so after 3 times he had anyway, it was a battle. So he decides, well, I don't want to look at this anymore, so he builds a 6 foot high privacy fence to try to hide the materials. And so then the neighbor continues to build the pile and now has it at 14 feet. And went and took the other neighbor's flag and put it up, his American flag, and put it up on top of the pile. So I'm just telling you this because, sometimes people can be abusive with this stuff. So I think however we do it, if we have the means to ensure that it's screened, can be screened. But in all reality, it should have been the neighbor with the junk that should have been doing the screening to begin with. But we just need a method that we can come and say, okay, this is enough of this, and have a means using the ordinances that we can eliminate those kind of problems.
And so that would be upon the property owner, the one that wants the junk. They would be the ones responsible for the screening from the public view and the neighboring property owner underneath that provision. And so what I'm thinking in that is that's a great provision for us to use for enforcement, because, you don't want to get rid of that car that you've got a lot of sentimental value, or maybe that equipment that's got a lot of sentimental value. You got to screen it, or you got to move it to a piece of your property and that where it's not going to be viewable. And then that should take and resolve the complaints, and that we are getting on it. So. So provision 3 and 4 says that all the junk's got to be in one contiguous area. Number 5 is currently set at 600 square feet or a 20 by 30 area. That's a very difficult thing. So basically, the way the rules are right now, you get a 20 by 30 area, 8 feet high. That's the amount of junk that you're able to have. That's great, and that, but that is the same amount for whether the property is, a couple acres in size or whether you got a 40-acre property in size. And so is that equitable, in that, or is there any consideration in that for the amount of land? So if it's 2% of the area of the rear yard, and that would be still enforceable, but it would grow with the parcel size.
But how about the guy who has an 80-acre farm, and so he's got an acre where he lives, whatever size an acre is. So he gets 2% of 79 acres he can pile junk on? Is that good?
I just did the math on that 'cause for the same reason. I figured, at an acre of land, 42,560 square feet, he would have the capability, it's 800 and, is that right? Or it's either 800 or 8,512.
But it would be in the rear yard area, so it would be from the back of the house. That would be the area you'd calculate, not the whole lot,
But,
right?
but you are correct, it's about 850 square feet per acre, you know, so it's just slightly more than the 600 square feet. But right now, 20 by 30, I mean, that's 2 vehicles, you know, and so that gives you an idea of what the space is if they were side by side roughly, you know, so it's not, it's almost, it's very limiting. So what that balance is, I don't know what it is, so.
I think, John, you were saying about the limits the size of his backyard, but he might call those 79 acres that are left his backyard.
Well, no, the rear yard is defined as where the back of your house starts
Okay,
to the rear lot line.
okay, but again,
So it's not,
if this is 80 acres and he's built right here, he's got
Yeah.
a lot to get
It
2%
would
of.
be by per parcel basis in that, or
Right.
per 40, and that is how it would be, but yes, you could survey and combine the 240s into one, you know, so I
Sure.
mean, there is a way to do it. The 2%, the reason why we didn't do 1% is because then we would actually be making it more restrictive than the 600 square feet, because 1% would be only 436 square feet or so, and versus 2%, it was just slightly more, so. That was kind of the thought process. Well, actually, the 2% was in there, so it was the lesser of the 600 square feet or the 2%. So that's kind of how it is right now, actually. So,
I think an amount of square feet might be more fair.
okay.
I mean, so that everybody is treated the same. They may not have room for 600 square feet, but the person who does can't exceed that.
Are you happy with 600 square feet?
Sure. I don't know, yeah, 600 would be 30 by 20. Sure.
Well, the other thing is if they're gonna be doing a lot more than that, they can apply for a conditional use permit or another means to, out there, junkyard.
They would have to come in for a salvage yard, yep, so. And there's lots and lots of properties that have more than 600 square feet in the county, so.
Yeah,
we
that's-
definitely keep our FTEs busy, so.
That's what I'm concerned about. But on the other side, we also don't want them to start creating salvage yards without being permitted.
Right.
So, I guess where's the happy medium where we're not finding whatever a large percentage of the lots here, but we're meeting the intention. If we up this to 1,000, would a lot of those lots that are currently out of compliance become in all of a sudden? Or a decent portion of them, just a guesstimate?
Couple thousand, you know, so, you know. There's a lot of stuff out there. you
Yeah.
know, and I mean, we got a pretty extensive list here, you know, and that we're already through, L, you know, of all the stuff, you know, so it's appliances and, you know, lots of stuff.
Is there any appetite to increase that maximum limit at all?
Well, if you have the guy that collects cars or tractors or, you know, and he has a few, I mean, I wouldn't mind opening it up a little bit more, but it would have to be, my concern is like what Jerry's saying, you know, I don't want to have it where somebody has 80 acres and they do the math and they can consider 60 acres of it as the backyard. And they get a huge, you know, where it really should be then a salvage a full salvage operation or junkyard. But for some, you know, if we kind of look at even like, what's a 100 by 100 space if it were, it would be 2% or a max,
There,
you know, a max,
yep,
so that we don't go over that.
up to 1,000.
Yep.
I like that better, so it's 2% of the backyard area, or with a maximum of 1,000 square feet.
Or 10,000.
Or
whatever it is.
600.
Yeah,
or-
100 by 100
Right.
area.
Yeah, that'd be better, just reverse
It's more
those two.
manageable.
Yep,
Yeah.
I think,
Well, but if they have 40 acres and they have it all in the middle of the pine tree woods, and it's all of his collector tractors. I don't- I'm sorry, yeah.
It's up to you guys. It's a policy call, so.
I like the with a maximum.
I think the with a maximum is good. I think the discussion at this point is what that maximum is. I think 10,000 to me seems like a lot. Yeah,
5,280 square feet is a
acre.
acre.
Yeah,
So that'd be 2 acres you could have. I think
I would say more like
2,000.
yeah. That's what I was thinking. 2,000.
So that's about size.
$2,000?
Yeah, so it would read 2% with a maximum of,
You could keep the old language and just change the lesser of 2,000 square feet or 2% there.
yeah.
Just change that 600 number to 2,000.
It'd be like a 20 by 100 area. Okay. Number 6 is one that I think is very easy to do administratively, and it's no more than 2 unlicensed or inoperable vehicles. A vehicle is considered inoperable if it doesn't run or is not capable of driving down a road in conformance with all motor vehicle requirements. And so, and that up above, we take and say that you can't have any inoperable vehicles, but in the exception category here, what happens if somebody's got a plow truck that they only use to plow their snow? Or what happens if they do have a parts vehicle on site, you know, and that while they're removing some parts? So that's kind of an exception to allow for up to 2 unlicensed or inoperable vehicles. Just throwing it out there.
Just to play devil's advocate with that, if you have a major home occupation that is a car repair place, he's gonna have unoperable cars on the site, so where do you draw that line?
And that would be a violation that we'd have to have a conditional use on, so.
The same way with a car collector, you know, they're gonna have more than, typically a collector will have 4 or 5 cars for every one that runs, for parts. I mean,
I know. That's where I'm just trying to create some conversation here, and that I really don't care where the committee wants to go with it. But right now, and that collector car guy, and that he's got to put all of his collector car and all of his collector car parts in 600 square feet or a 20 by 30 area, and that's what the current rules are, and that's where it's very, very restrictive in that for our staff to enforce.
and yet if he has a small backyard, that's all that should be back there. I mean, otherwise, what do you say? If you have a small backyard, you can fill it up completely. I think that amount has to be there.
Yeah,
But-
so
but-
that's good in that,
Yeah.
but
But I just think maybe that number 2 could be increased. If there's room for more than 2.
I don't know. In my opinion, 6 is unnecessary with 5 restricting the maximum size. Yeah, the current red number 6 is unnecessary, the restriction on unlicensed vehicles. Because if you're restricted to a maximum size, no matter how big your lot is, the kind of, I guess, would still,
I guess to me, 6, if you wrote something in there, a condition of does not apply to auto repair businesses or,
maybe let's be a little bit more, but this does not apply to temporary storage for or related to major home occupations or something like that.
Something like that. No more than 2 unlicensed or inoperable vehicles unless unless on a parcel used for auto repair.
I think you should put a slash behind repair and put restoration behind that also. Because that's the same thing, except the term is longer. Typically, a restoration will take 2 years.
How about used or permitted?
do we want to say business behind it? Because a guy could throw some cars in his backyard and say, I'm working on them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I kind of want to put a time frame on that too.
That makes enforcement really hard.
Then he'll plant flowers around it and call it
Art.
art.
I don't know, and that, just number 5, the area, I think of more of like the appliances and the scrap materials and the scrap metal pile and that, and the vehicles, they seem like they're definitely prohibited in, A above, you know, and that with anything that's not operable. And so that's kind of where we're trying to get something to nail it down, because right now our staff was basically limiting it to the 200, or the 600 square feet, so.
So how about if we raise that limit from the 600 to the 2,000 square feet we did in 5? Then you wouldn't say 2, you would say, what, 4, 5, whatever cars. Or, you know, just use that number up there that we have, the minimum squares.
If you don't want it, we can cut out 6, so.
That'd be another idea, yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
we've got enough restrictions on everything else.
okay. Everybody on the same page? Okay. Provision 6 here, agricultural equipment in operation condition and still being used. I just tried to clarify that before, but then we added it above, so here we kind of got it spelled out again, so it's maybe duplicating, but. And that, again, junk vehicles would have the fluids drained. So, the screening around the property, the junk location, we'll have to change the map here to 2,000. No junk permitted in the street yard. So, are we okay with that? Okay. Kennels,
I'm sorry to backtrack a little bit on that one, but I keep thinking about it on the vehicles. Where it becomes difficult is like, and I got another example. Long County Road C, we have issue where an individual has several vehicles that don't run, aren't licensed, and they sit between his house and the road. Now, he also lives on the Apple River, so his front yard towards the road is actually his backyard, because they consider the lakes, the riverside, the front of the house. So this becomes a huge nuisance for all of the neighbors that are out there. And you know, do we have a means still left in here that we can control that type of situation?
the only thing that I'm aware of right now that we would have is that it must be screened from public view. would be the only thing.
Isn't there a definition on the front of the yard being the street access face?
It is, yep.
I think in villages, it's the address, the mailing address. So,
Right.
It might be Newton Street or 12th Avenue, but it's wherever the front door is on typically.
Yep, so that's where we got the street here, and it's basically from the backside of the dwelling forward. So that one on C would be considered the street yard underneath our junk provisions. And I know that we got an enforcement case going on that one too, so, if it's the one I'm thinking of. Okay. Kennel structures shall be set back at least 300 feet from all property lines or 200 feet by conditional use permit if additional standards are met. And so wondering, in that, do we really want 200 feet? Generally, conditional use permit, it's going to be kind of one or the other, you know. So when we go down farther, it talks about the buildings being soundproofed and stuff. So 300 feet, you know, and that there's still buildable area in a 40, but you're basically not going to build anything probably on a 10-acre parcel for a kennel. You're going to need more than 10 acres. So I don't know, and that it's just kind of odd when you start doing setbacks with a conditional use versus a variance too. It's just kind of a different kind of way to do zoning. So I don't know, are we okay keeping it just with 300 feet?
I'm okay with 300 feet.
I like keeping that out, yeah.
Okay. And that, so then here, A, kennel structures housing animals shall provide soundproofing so that the animal noise cannot be heard beyond the owner's lot lines. So right there is kind of why we to construct the 200 feet, because it really doesn't matter how far it is. So, but we did keep the 300 feet because that was more restrictive. Animals shall be housed indoors from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. And there shall be no more than the following number of dogs, cats, 6 months of age or older, outdoors at any time. And then it's 16 for the Ag 1, Ag 2, C1, and C3 properties. As far as how many animals are within a particular run, I don't know what we would regulate that for, because I would assume the dogs or the cats outside would be the noise of the barking potentially, you know. So if they're in 2 runs or if they're in 16 runs, it's probably the same, you know. So that's kind of the thought process there. Same thing, number 2, 6 animals within the R1 zoning classification. Again, does it really matter how many runs that they are in? Okay. And then provision E, and that any additional standards to allow smaller setbacks for outdoor kennels would be by conditional use permit. And so views of the outdoor kennel, so that's all the same. So that 300 foot could be actually reduced by conditional use permit, how we've got that drafted.